Ladies, gentlemen, and pals of all ages, when it comes to tackling the toughest challenges in Palworld, especially now with the Feybreak update, your enemies can turn into some absolutely ridiculous bullet sponge level opponents that take a ton of time and resources to actually chew through to accomplish your success. The best ways to tackle these and deal with this issue are either, first, if you really don't care in the world settings, you can just boost your player or pal damage. I know, but it did have to be mentioned based on the content of the video. The other main ways, though, are boosting the damage that your player does and boosting the damage that your pals do through in-game methods, doing things that are intended by the devs. And while these can be quite time intensive to actually get done, there are varying levels to it all, and even like a 6 or 7 out of 10 optimized setup will give you exponentially better results than just throwing out the pals you like most and haven't applied any upgrades to, or just using like a flat common rarity weapon that you unlocked at level 40. So today we're going to go over how to maximize player power within the game, how to maximize pal power for any pal in the game, even if you want to make something like King Paka into the best combat version of himself possible. And then we'll talk about how to expand these concepts outwards into what they easily have the largest effect on, which is raid fights in the end section of the game. Starting off with your player then, the first thing to consider is your weapon itself, as this is the sort of basis of your damage. Which weapon is best depends on a number of factors, the type of encounter, the expected length, and most importantly, what your resources are like. If you have the ability to make thousands and thousands of plasma cannon shots, then the plasma cannon obviously is going to be the goddamn superior weapon in the game, but the ammo for the plasma cannon is quite hefty to craft if you're not set up for it. Personally, I'm still a big fan of the pump action shotgun as a cheaper option for weapon archetype, and then of course the best way to make the weapons stronger in themselves is to use the higher rarity versions of them up to legendary at maximum. We've got videos on the channel already discussing how to get each legendary weapon in the game, but to mention these two specifically, the legendary plasma cannon schematic is a 0.75% chance to drop from the golden chest at the end of the new level 60 oil rig west of Feybreak Island. The legendary pump action shotgun schematic is a 3% drop chance from the Alpha Suzaku out to the northeast in the desert area. These can provide a 30% or even greater bonus to the attack stat over the common rarity version of the same weapon, and they also have double the durability, so they will need to be repaired less frequently. There's also defense to consider too, so obviously you'd want to do the same with your armor, with the legendary versions of the various Hexalite armor schematics having drop chances from any open world chest on Feybreak Island, from the Feybreak Island supply drops, and also from the new level 60 oil rig's smaller chests too, which is also the only place to find the legendary lightweight Hexalite armor schematic. Past that, there are accessories as well, and sadly a few months ago they removed the ability to use 2 of the same accessory at once, so now you can't stack 2 of the attack plus 2 pendants. However, with the Sakurajima update, they gave the ability to unlock 2 extra accessory slots. If you want to maximize your pure attack, you can technically still run the attack pendant plus 2, attack pendant plus 1, and the regular base attack pendant all together, which is actually the same equivalent of having 2 attack plus 2 pendants, but across 3 slots instead of 2. Then you've got a spare slot for any of the other accessories that you'd like to have on. Attack pendant plus 2 comes from the Blazamut Ryu raid, as well as any high level dungeons or supply drops from the snowy mountain part of the game upwards. Attack pendant plus 1 comes from the desert or volcano dungeons and supply drops, and the base attack pendant comes from the generic lower level area dungeons, supply drops, the sanctuary chests, or the level 30 oil rig normal chests as well. Past this, there are character stats which work surprisingly similar to PAL stats. You can use your level up points whenever you level up to gain more of a stat of your choosing, with some of the options being attack, of course, which generally just directly translates to more damage with your weapons by the player, as well as defense and health, which are great for survivability too in combat. The fun part of this is that by default, you only get the points that you get to use here when you level, which means in theory it should be limited and your choices of which stats you put points into would actually matter a lot, but there is actually a way within the game now to boost your stats to their maximum, to the point that you literally can't even spend all of your level up points because you've done this. Through an update last year, they added in remedies and elixirs. These are items that you can apply to yourself as the player to permanently boost your own stats, the same way that level up points do. However, you cannot have more than 50 level up points in each specific stat, so you can actually reach the cap for each stat you value through these elixirs with enough farming of either the materials to craft them yourself or dog coins to trade for them from the metal merchants. And this is one of the ways long term to have a much stronger player character. Just for the sake of showing you the difference of the things we've done so far, this clip is an oldie but a goodie. Here's the damage of a regular common assault rifle with no equipment or stat upgrades to affect it. Now here's the damage of a legendary assault rifle. Now add in our suite of attack pendants for all those bonuses, and now full attack stat skill points loaded in as well, just to show you the value of all of these different parts that we've done so far and how much your damage can increase very quickly by working in even a few of them. The next step is short-term solutions or food. In the base game, there or advanced food types that you could make and use to increase your attack stat for 10 minutes after eating. And they actually added a new one of these in the Feybreak update that is even more potent than the old ones were, the Mammorest Curry. This can be made at the large oven, and it also drops just all over the place in Feybreak with very high drop rates from the open world treasures on the island, and this increases your attack by a whopping 25% after you eat it for 10 minutes, which is just a really massive amount for a short-term buff, so having a supply of these ready before a big fight can make quite the difference. That said, you can then take this even further if you want to be just really crazy with it and maximize the player at the cost of everything else, as there are various ways to use your pals to boost player damage specifically, such as using one of the pals with a skill that changes your damage type while you're riding it, which would let you super effect any manner of pal with your own weapon if you prepare properly. This has always been extremely potent, but today I want to talk about more slightly realistic setups that most players might actually use, so instead I'll just mention that if any of your pal slots are basically going unused, if none of the pals that you have on are things that you want to use for combat, I recommend sticking in a Gobfin in that slot, as their partner skill passively boosts the attack of the player if they are in your party, with the bonus increasing at higher star levels of the pal too if you condense into them. You can also build the Gobfin to have the Vanguard passive, which boosts player attack even more on top of that. That said, that pretty much covers the ways of boosting player power specifically, so now let's extend that to your various battle friends, your pals, and how to make them as strong as possible. There are multiple different aspects of this, but by far the most important is breeding. We have a full Feybreak updated breeding guide already up on this channel for more details about setting that up in itself to begin with, but it's worth mentioning that I will be talking about the ideal passives and how to mess with IVs and stuff like that, and the best ways to achieve all of that come from having a good breeding setup as your foundation. That said, first up, let's talk about passives. There are tons of good passives in the game, and the specific set of 4 perfect passives is generally at least a little bit individual to the pal you're trying to make strong. For a dark pal, you might even want to breed down something like Lord of Darkness from Necromus, the legendary pal for bonus dark damage, but obviously that would be useless on a pal of any other type. And honestly, with the modern passives that we have in the current version of the game, that's not even one of the best passives anymore. Generally speaking though, the highest tier combat focused passive skills for pals are Legend, which gives 20% attack, 20% defense, and 15% bonus movement speed, Demon God, which gives 30% attack and 5% defense, and these two will be on most any high tier combat pal in the entire game, with the other 2 slots having at least a little bit more variety. There is Musclehead, which boosts attack by 30% at the cost of 50% work speed reduction. There is Vampiric as an option, which gives the pal lifesteal for a portion of its damage dealt, which is not bad at all for longer or extended fights by any means. And then a really solid one is Serenity for lowering the skill cooldowns of your pal by 30% and increasing its attack by 10%, which is a lot of value. And for a pal with particularly longer cooldown abilities, you may even want to stack that with the Impatient passive as well for a further 15% cooldown reduction too. Some other options if you're looking to fill a 4th passive slot is stuff like the various Lord of X skills, like the different elemental damage boosts, which give you a 20% boost to that element type damage, and there is also the Ferocious passive, which is just a general 20% attack boost too. To get the 4 passives that you want onto a pal once you've decided what they are, you need to breed into it with parents that between them have those specific 4 passives, and then the classic way would be to have no other differing passives on them. But if you can work in the Philanthropist passive, it's the only one that's actually positive as a 5th passive within the breeding pool, as it increases breeding speed by 100%, which in itself makes up for muddying up the odds a little bit, but then it also has a hidden effect where it increases the chances of the offspring inheriting 4 passives from 1 in 10 to 1 in 9, which is potent in itself. The other main consideration for pals is their IVs, their individual values, which when the game first released into early access were completely hidden values that were data mined by players, but since then we've had the ability glasses item added to the game that lets you see all pal IVs on a scale of 0 to 100 when you have them equipped. This represents the scaling power of each of their main stats, with a 0 in potential, meaning that it has the minimum scaling for that species, a 100 in potential, meaning it has the maximum scaling for the species. The difference between a 0 attack potential pal and a 100 attack potential pal is a bit under 30% for reference of how much of a difference it actually makes, and you can also pass on IVs through breeding pals, with the egg that comes out having a 21.6% chance to inherit all 3 of its IVs from the parent pals that created it. Generally speaking, I'd say the easiest thing to do though is focus purely on getting the 4 correct passives above all else while breeding, as you can actually make up for lower IVs through other methods, whereas passives are at least a little bit more rigid. That said, to be more specific, like the elixirs and remedies that I mentioned for the player earlier, there are stat fruits that you can get either through trading with successful bounty tokens to the bounty vendors, or from the metal merchants in exchange for dog coins, or even just as rewards for higher level raid fights too. And these stat fruits, when used, will raise the related IV of a pal by 10 up to its maximum. So if you have a pal that has an 80 attack IV, it's not that big of a loss because you can then just buy 2 fruits and boost it up to the maximum of 100 anyways. The next major factor then is using pal souls at the statue of power to boost your pals. These exist in churches across the map, or you can make your own in your base after unlocking them, and you can spend pal souls here to boost different stats of each individual pal up to a maximum of 60% for each stat, which is massive. Fully maxing out each stat takes 10 small souls, 6 medium souls, 6 large souls, and a whopping 30 giant pal souls, which are the highest rarity souls that were added in updates after the initial early access launch, and you can easiest get these from just farming rampaging pals. Before these, the maximum increase to a stat for each pal was 30%, but now it's 60%, so it is a pretty massive route to increasing power potential long term, with the earlier upgrades for smaller pal souls being very achievable, and the later upgrades taking at least a little bit more effort and more of a purposeful farming method. So this is one of those spots where going to 50 or 60% of the maximum power is still more realistic for most players and most pals, but is still a massive increase in output overall compared to just not interacting with the system in the first place. Bonus tip as well, Nitemary. This is a new pal in the Feybreak update that makes pals drop bonus pal souls when you defeat them with the pal out. So if you're farming pal souls, if you're specifically going around farming rampaging pals so that you can get the giant pal souls, this will speed up the process by a pretty significant amount, especially if you add condensing and star ranks into the mix, as this can increase the potency of the partner skill if you do that with your Nitemary. Then the final permanent consideration is in fact the pal essence condenser, which I did just sort of reference, and the all-purpose pal extract. The condenser lets you shove increasingly larger amounts of a pal that you don't want into a member of that same species that you want to make stronger. The first star rank of condensing takes 4 pals, then 16 for the second rank, 32 for the third rank, and 64 for the final rank, so it gets harder and more time consuming the higher up you go. Each star rank on top of upgrading the partner skill for the pal, which is quite the boost for any pal with a combat related partner skill to begin with, will also increase all stats for that pal by 5% of its base. So with the full 4 stars, a pal will be a minimum of 20% stronger across the board than it would be without any stars at all, and that's excluding any pal skill differences. You can also, if you collect enough dog coins, trade with the metal merchants for an all-purpose pal extract item. This is the equivalent of just applying a star rank to a pal immediately, and generally speaking I only recommend condensing star ranks into pals that already have perfect passives and at least high enough IVs that you are willing to use fruits for the rest of the climbing the way, and most of the time the breeding required to make that happen will give you a ton of fodder for condensing into them anyways. That said, if you have the spare dog coins, I actually would highly recommend using the all-purpose pal extract specifically only for the final step of condensing if you need it. It will add 1 star rank to a pal no matter what rank it was at before you used it, so if you use it to get the first star rank on a pal, it's the equivalent of replacing 4 pals condensed, which is not much value at all, but using it for the final rank saves you 64 pals of condensing, and that's quite a nice little efficiency bump there when it's available. Then finally, I mentioned it in the player power boosting section, but it does apply to pals too, and these are food buffs, and specifically the new Mammorest Curry food type that was added in Feybreak, which if you feed it to a pal will boost their attack stat by a further 25% for 10 minutes afterwards, just to make it that little bit more potent, even that little more. To sort of stack everything up then, for player power specifically, you want the highest rarity versions of good weapons that you can sustain the ammo for, you want at least a full attack stat from your skill points combined with remedies and elixirs, you want combat boosting accessories in all slots, you want to consume Mammorest Curry whenever you're going into a more important fight, and if you want to use some of your pal slots to boost it, you can carry some Gobfin in your spare slots with Vanguard passive to even further boost the damage that your player does. Then for your pal and making it powerful, you want to get a set of 4 really strong combat passives. Boost the IVs as much as possible, boost them through the statue of power as well, condense their star rating up to make them more powerful, and then also feed them the Mammorest Curry too. This will make literally anything in the game much less of a challenge to interact with, and you can even extrapolate the same concept out massively when trying to take on things like the highest level raid bosses. The new most consistent raid method is just breeding 20 perfect passive, perfect IV, pal soul boosted and condensed pals that counter the typing of the boss you are going to fight, then letting them just go to town on it completely. And while it is an extreme version of this concept for sure, it all builds off of the foundations that I went over today, but that shows you how effectively it can be put into practice. That just about does it for today then everyone, all of the ways to increase player and pal power within Palworld, while also explaining the process of each, because there's nothing wrong with just aiming for 7 or 8 out of 10 perfection section instead of the full 10, as it will take you a lot less time to reach, but will also just make you unbelievably stronger than if you didn't do any of this stuff to begin with. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.